because we're the Openlands Project, we're concerned with the retention and the development of more space for people, recognizing that we do need breathing space, we need living space, an opportunity to be out in the open. You see, man has been on the planet for estimated up into the millions of years, and through our whole long biological history, we have been intimately related with the air, the land, and the water. As man developed and as human life developed, it came out of the ocean. So we have an affinity to the water, we have an affinity to the tides, we have an affinity to all growing things, and this is something that's a part of our deep, deep nature. I walk into your studios this evening and I see fresh flowers instead of plastic flowers. Well, this was a delight for me to see, because here was a little of attention. But even the utilization of plastic flowers is a symbol to us that this is something that's deep down inside us, and that we want to retain some point of contact with nature. So that these are parts of how man has developed, and why parks, why green space, why lawns, why trees are important to us, because of our long heritage of growing up through this experience.
I think one of the marvelous things that Openlands has done is to leave this 50 years, 5 decades of legacy of open space and trails connecting green spaces throughout our region, large projects like the Medueowan National Tallgrass Prairie, and most recently the Hakmatak National Wildlife Refuge, and then the Openlands Lakeshore Preserve, which is just one of our true legacies that bring together culture and conservation and connecting people with nature. But there's also small ways, small parks, community gardens, school gardens, policies that have helped protect our natural areas throughout the state, cooperation with our neighboring states in Indiana and Michigan and Wisconsin. Our footprint is everywhere, and it's green.
And in the context of the time, Openlands was the only organization in Chicago that had a staff at all, and besides Nature Conservancy. And Nature Conservancy at that time had a much more restricted mission than it later developed, which I think was part of the reason Openlands itself had been organized several years earlier in 1963 with the mission of protecting and preserving open lands or open space, and mainly in the greater Chicago area.
I think that I would describe Openlands from the outset and continuing today as a bridge between the two somewhat separate branches of Chicago progressivism. On the one hand, the populist tradition dating back to Jane Addams, Hull House. By the way, Jane Addams was personally involved in the early Indiana Dunes crusade. But the efforts to improve the lot of ordinary people, working people, immigrants, and so forth, neighborhoods. That's one part of it. On the other side, and equally important in the work of Openlands, was the downtown business community. That was an important time because some of the business community were perhaps from the more traditional conservationist perspective of interest in wildlife, natural areas, wherever they may be, and conserving beautiful places, but not necessarily for people, that ordinary people might really wreck them if there were too many. So that was the view that really dates back to the era of Teddy Roosevelt and so forth, early progressive conservatives. But that was in the 60s. That was beginning to be refocused through organizations like Openlands on urban open space and suburban areas.
People have a certain perception of community greening programs and urban greening programs, and there's a lot of focus on sort of just building the garden or actual specific activities. But I think the huge ancillary positive impact is just getting urban dwellers outside, getting families that are used to being in these sort of closed-in communities, in many cases public housing, just outside and understanding that this is a place for them as well. You don't have to be holed up in your apartment. The outside open spaces, parks, the lake, that's your place as well. You know, it's not just for them, it's for you as well. So I think it may not be overtly stated in the programming of Openlands and other organizations that do amazing urban work, but for me, the huge positive impact is the fact that these families are actually connecting with nature personally, and they're experiencing it, and they're starting to understand the value of it and how it can benefit them, their families, and their own community.
I've enjoyed getting to know so many people all over the city that I would not otherwise have known, and so many places I wouldn't have known about, building the constituency and connecting with community partners who are gardeners and who are tree keepers who care for trees. So gardeners, tree keepers, the people in schools who care about the environment and who are interested in open space. Just building that huge network of community partners is what I've enjoyed most.
I think just about everybody that goes through the class figures, gee, this is all about beautifying the city and cleaning the air and doing all that great stuff. But actually, I have found that tree keepers is quite a different sort of an experience. I can go anywhere in the city and somebody will grab me and say, hey, I know you, we moved mulch last summer. Anywhere I go, I see trees that I've worked on, I see people that I've worked with. So in a lot of ways, what we're involved in more is social organizing than beautifying the city.
Every time we've had a vision, it's come true. One of the things, the one I remember that probably applies most directly is the idea of having large regional land preservation projects. So now we have the Openlands Lakeshore Preserve, we have a mile of Lake Michigan beachfront that's been preserved for the public, and then the Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge, which is really a huge potential project. And then the whole Vital Lands project that we do with a number of other partners, but the whole idea of making a big difference in an area where there's still the opportunity to make a big difference.
The role of Openlands has, I think, been to some extent to resist uncoordinated development. I don't like to use the word sprawl because it sort of implies a moral judgment about people who live in subdivisions and so on, which I don't think we're entitled to make. We have been part at Openlands of attempting to get a more sophisticated control of land use. But I think the main thing we have to do that is to increase the demand for a different kind of open space, to increase the demand for more of it, and to recognize its role in a good communal life. I think that the response recently has been fairly supportive if you can get in there early. But changing the felt need, changing people's apprehension of what they're losing if they lose some open space, has been a major role we've had, and to some extent we've succeeded, and we've got a long way to go.
Hey, we got this 3 acres over here, or we got this 20 acres next to the school and it's going to be developed. How do we do it? And they go to Openlands, and somebody was there who understood about and could meet with them, whether it was a board member like George Owen or a staff member who understood things about land. I mean, after all, we went from the staff of 2, we started getting people who had expertise in certain areas.
We visited the day when that was 15,000, 18,000 acre acquisition, a long time in coming, and that's one of the things about many of our projects is that from conception to acquisition or final protection, years may pass, but we have the the patience and the will and the know-how to see it through from beginning to end.
If there hadn't been any open lands, lots of areas would be put into development. Lots of areas would be standing idle with rubble on them. It is important to be vigilant, and the open lands role has been to keep alert and really understand the whole area and the ecosystems in the Collier, mainly in the Collier counties of Chicago. It takes a long time to complete a conservation project, and I've learned from about 40 years of being in this that you've got to save everything at least twice. There are always threats that come later. For example, the Bell Woods almost had the Wabash River dredged for a coal barge canal, and they would cut right through the horseshoe bends. And the Goose Lake Prairie almost had a resin plant built on the edge of it, which would have smelled dreadfully.
I know that Openlands has expanded their reach in the region, and I think that's really a good thing, because land is a finite resource. It's a valuable resource, and it's still very reasonable because of the economy. It's kind of a silver lining in the economic downturn that we've had for over the last 5 years. But certainly Openlands has been an organization that can really help local governments and fills a niche on a regional perspective on land acquisition. I'm thrilled that the organization is experiencing and celebrating its 50th anniversary. It's a great organization, has had major impacts in the Chicago region and basically throughout all of Illinois and into Wisconsin and Indiana. So it's a great organization, and I hope it's there in another 50 years.
But it's never boring. I mean, every time we have a meeting of some sort, there's new projects, new things for us to be concerned about, and new solutions that we come up with. I mean, it's the best part about working with Openlands is it's the most creative organization I have ever been involved with, because there's terrific imagination and a lot of creativity, and it's remarkable. So we've done incredible things, preserving open space, saving open space, and then restoring degraded properties. But we also have, we have people who are thinking of trails and bike trails and water trails, and we are in a great position to get people involved in the things that we think are important for society.
I think conservation initiatives operate on the same principles the world over, and in many of the international programs that I've been involved with, I think the most effective ones have strong community-based components, and Openlands certainly has a strong community piece to it. In fact, that's the real strength of Openlands. I think that wherever there is aspiration for conservation and for engaging people in nature, the community has to be strongly behind it, strongly involved in the development of initiatives. And so Openlands to me is a wonderful example of a conservation group that embraces an entire region and then communities within that region. So I think it's got all the right elements for longevity and for making a real difference in the region.
I'm very optimistic that the general public, no matter where they are, is getting a better understanding of what our natural resource base is than they ever have before. And I think that's very important. And I think because of that extra knowledge they have, there can be justification for preserving some areas that are worthy of preservation, for putting together such things as corridors like Durs Anderson talks about. People are understanding this that didn't understand this at all 10 years ago.
And that's why I'm optimistic. We have a better understanding of the public.
I think a 50th anniversary is a great time to reflect on the past, to showcase the extraordinary accomplishments, but as important it is to look to the future, the kinds of opportunities and challenges that we face as a large multi-state metropolitan area, and what our role is within a very complicated landscape, complicated in terms of land use and decision making, complicated in terms of the numbers of partners that we have. And so I think that there are still tremendous avenues, for us to be extremely effective as this regional player, but these are different times, and it requires, I think, some creativity and new thinking about best ways to accomplish our goals.